We often hear of Titus as the protege of Apostle Paul, a faithful disciple, a leader in Crete, and a trusted organizer of the early church. But what if this narrative is only half the story? What if Titus was more than just a loyal follower, more than just Paul's obedient executor of church matters? Imagine, for a moment, Titus not as the compliant son in the faith, but as an ambitious leader navigating the delicate balance of Paul's instructions and the complex realities of a growing Christian movement. The island of Crete was no gentle mission field. It was a crossroads of commerce and ideology, steeped in Greek philosophy and Roman governance. Establishing leadership and enforcing doctrine, there would not have been a simple task of setting up elders and teaching sound doctrine. Could it be that Titus, rather than merely following orders, was reshaping Paul's vision to fit the turbulent social and political landscape of Crete? Perhaps his role was less about obediently implementing Paul's wishes and more about adapting them, negotiating with local leaders, bending doctrines to avoid conflict, and perhaps even softening Paul's harsh instructions to fit the expectations of Greek converts. After all, Crete was famously known for its own ideas and cultural pride. Would they have easily submitted to the demands of a foreign preacher's disciple? And what of the qualifications for elders? Paul's letters outline strict requirements, men of integrity, self-control, and firm in doctrine. But in the real world of Crete, were these idealistic standards fully met? Or did Titus find himself appointing leaders who were less than perfect, simply to maintain the church's fragile grip on the community? Did he compromise? Did he adjust Paul's guidelines for the sake of survival and growth? Moreover, Paul's reference to Titus as his son in the common faith carries implications of authority and loyalty, but also of control. Titus may have been more than a mere student. He might have been a strategic operator, someone who understood that to solidify Christianity's roots in a volatile region like Crete, he would need to be politically astute, culturally sensitive, and perhaps more independent than Paul intended. Could it be that Paul's letters, while instructive, were also a means of keeping Titus in check? An attempt to remind him of the chain of command and the purity of doctrine amid the pragmatic decisions Titus was forced to make? I can continue unearthing this alternate perspective, peeling back the layers of Titus's role in Crete and the possible tensions that brewed beneath the surface. If we dig deeper into Paul's letters, we begin to see shadows of subtle tension, not outright rebellion, but hints that Titus's methods may have occasionally diverged from Paul's idealistic instructions. Consider the matter of appointing elders in every town. Paul is clear that these men should be above reproach, yet Crete was known for its corruption and moral laxity. Even Paul himself famously quoted the Cretan poet Epimenides, saying, "Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons." Would it not be naive to assume that every elder Titus appointed met these impossible standards? If the movement was to survive, Titus would have needed local allies, men with influence and connections, not just pristine moral records. Perhaps the church in Crete was, in part, built on political strategy as much as it was on faith. Titus may have been forced to turn a blind eye to certain blemishes in character for the sake of gaining trust and holding ground. And what of Titus's supposed loyalty to Paul? Yes, Paul calls him my true son in the faith, but this phrase can also be read as possessive, a reminder of Titus's origins, a claim of spiritual ownership. The fact that Paul took the time to write to Titus with detailed instructions on how to run the church suggests two things. Either Paul did not fully trust Titus to act independently, or Titus's leadership style required occasional correction. Was Titus truly Paul's obedient protege, or was he a political operator who knew when to nod in agreement while doing what was necessary on the ground? Furthermore, Paul's repeated emphasis on sound doctrine hints at a deeper issue. In Crete, where philosophy and Greek mythology were deeply woven into society, the Christian message would have had stiff competition. There is reason to speculate that Titus, in his role, might have softened certain doctrines to make them more palatable, to gain influence among Greek converts, or even to prevent outright rejection. Was the teaching always as sound as Paul demanded? Or was there a quiet reshaping happening in the background, one that kept the peace but veered from the original message? And then there is the notion of authority. Paul urges Titus not to be afraid to use his power, an interesting admonition if Titus was already seen as strong and resolute. Was this because Titus was hesitant, or was it because Titus's version of leadership did not always match Paul's hardline vision? Did Titus rule with a softer hand in Crete to maintain fragile alliances? Did he practice diplomacy where Paul expected domination? We might even question the lasting impact of Titus's work. Historical records on the church in Crete are sparse. Did it flourish as Paul intended, or did Titus's adaptive measures lead to a diluted form of Christianity that struggled to maintain its integrity? Was Paul's final letter to Titus a gesture of faith in his disciple, or a final attempt to reassert control over a mission field that was slipping into its own version of Christianity? As we pull back the layers of Titus's story, a different narrative begins to emerge, one that challenges the simplicity of blind loyalty and reveals the complexities of leadership in a volatile environment. Rather than merely being the obedient son in the common faith, Titus may well have been a pragmatic leader, one who understood that survival in Crete required more than just strict adherence to Paul's doctrine. It required political savvy, compromise, and at times, a softening of ideals. Paul's letters, often seen as instructional, can also be read as assertions of authority, attempts to keep Titus aligned with his own vision for the church. The repeated calls for sound doctrine suggest underlying tensions. Perhaps Titus's leadership style in Crete diverged from Paul's hardline expectations. In a land where Greek thought and Roman rule influenced every aspect of life, strict conformity would have been nearly impossible without alienating potential converts. We are left to wonder, was the church in Crete truly a reflection of Pauline doctrine, or did it evolve into something uniquely Cretan under Titus's hand? History, as told through Paul's letters, only offers one perspective. But if Titus indeed adapted and reshaped the mission to suit the landscape of Crete, then the church that grew there was not merely Paul's vision. It was Titus's calculated compromise. This reimagined narrative doesn't villainize Titus. Instead, it paints him as a strategist, someone who understood that ideals often tested and reshaped by reality. His success in establishing the church in Crete may have come not solely from Paul's teachings, but from his ability to read the room, negotiate with local powers, and adapt doctrine for survival. In this light, Titus was not just Paul's disciple. He was a political architect, subtly molding the church to fit its world while keeping just enough of Paul's message to maintain legitimacy. Perhaps that is the true legacy of Titus, not a mere follower, but a leader who understood the cost of survival in the early church. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.